This is The Speaking Show. I'm David Newman, and you're tuned in to the #1 podcast for speakers, consultants, and experts who want to speak more profitably. My special guest today, the awesome and amazing Nathan Littleton, who also has an awesome and amazing accent. Welcome, my friend.
Hey, praise indeed. Awesome accent. That's cool.
Now, I'm not sure. See, this is because you're in the UK. I'm here in the US. The real question is, who has the accent?
That's a good question. I mean, there's an argument to say we invented the language, so surely you can take claim for the accent.
That's true. So we are the ones that have totally mutilated it. And as they say, we are two people separated by a common language.
Absolutely. Sounds good to me.
Well, you have a very, very interesting entrepreneurial story. So even before we talk about email marketing and all the things that speakers can be doing better and smarter with their email marketing, tell us a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey of what brought you to what you're doing today and what were some of the stops along the path.
Yeah, sure. I mean, my journey was quite unique at the time, but now is something that seems more commonplace in the UK, in the States, and all around the world, which is I started my business at a very young age. I started it at 12 years old while I was at school. And that came about really from a hobby. My hobby was building websites, mostly with things that 12-year-olds liked, with jokes and games, things like that. But then I realized that there were other people who were doing the same thing, using those same skills that I had, but they were developing websites for businesses. And far from earning the kind of money that you get from a paper round, they were earning very, very decent livings. So I thought, well, if I can take those same skills and apply it to creating websites, then hey, that should be a good thing. So that was what I did. I went out, sold websites to businesses, earned a decent living from it, and took it all the way through school into a business that, although it looks different today, is essentially the same business. I don't do websites anymore. That's in the past now. But what I developed that into was a digital marketing business. Now I work specifically on email marketing. So everything I do is around either speaking on email marketing, writing books on email marketing, or simply delivering email marketing in some way for businesses, experts, coaches, consultants.
I want to go back to little 12-year-old Nathan just for a quick second. How'd you get business? Did you just cold call people? Did you have flyers? Did you visit people in person? Give me the marketing and sales plan of the 12-year-old Nathan.
Well, I mean, you do me a credit to say there was a sales and marketing plan for 12-year-old Nathan. I'm not sure there was, but I think I admire, looking back at myself at 12 years old, I admire something that I think only 12-year-olds have, which is you just do what feels right. And you have the brass neck of someone who will just go out there. And if you're looking for someone who wants a website, well, you'll go and ask as many people as you can who you think might be appropriate. Hey, do you need a website? And far from being a sales and marketing plan, it did work. I mean, I remember back when I was probably 13, so I had my business for a little while, sold a few websites. I saw a car driving past that was for a magician. And that was my first cold call because I saw his number on the side of his car and noticed that there wasn't a website address. So I thought, hey, that's a prime candidate for a website, I'm sure. Unfortunately for me, my voice broke quite early. So at 13 years old, I was able to have the image of someone who ran a successful business, at least if only in having a voice manly enough to do so.
There you go. That is totally fantastic. All right, well, let's fast forward to today. And man, oh man, everyone's email inbox is so crowded. You know, we get 50 promotional emails a day, and that might be on the low side. Yeah. And we get sales emails, and we get newsletters, and we get promotions, and we get, hey, I have a new podcast, and hey, come to my thing, and I'm doing a live event, and buy my book launch emails, and we're just getting through. I'm sure you've gotten these as well. You know, Tony Robbins is doing this big, gigantic launch now with every possible partner under the sun. So we have these waves of gurus that are emailing us several times a year. What are some of the do's and don'ts if we're a non-celebrity, no name, no brand guru? How should we start thinking about email marketing? And maybe what are some bad habits that we can avoid in the first place?
Well, you're absolutely right. People are receiving so many emails, in many cases, emails that they don't want to receive. And I think that's because businesses, including speakers, they're not placing enough value, I think, on the where someone has a price that they attach to their email address, if the value that you're giving in return, either directly in exchange for the email address or in the content of the emails that you're sending, if that value isn't meeting the price that they place on their email address, then you're going to have some unhappy readers. You're certainly going to have people who aren't going to make the kind of buying decisions that you want them to make. So I saw this same thing when I started email marketing about 10, 15 years ago, which was knowing that people are receiving so many emails. Many of them are effective, and lots of people are saying that email marketing is still working. But on the other side of that, you've got a whole bunch of people who say that email marketing isn't working. So there has to be a reason for that. And it's true. And I created a set of 3 principles that dictate whether email marketing can work effectively. Because when I did the research into why it wasn't working, typically it was because one of these 3 things was missing. So I created 3 pillars. The first of those is to build a list. This is quite simply building a list of people who would recognize your name when it landed in their inbox. But more importantly than that, they recognize the name in a way that makes them think, oh, I want to read what that person's saying. And that's no mean feat. That's a tough thing to achieve. But of course, it's an important one. The way that you do that is with the second principle. That is by serving your list. You serve that list with content that they're going to find interesting in some way. So it could be that it's educational. For speakers, it's typically built around your area of expertise, but it could simply be informative, relevant to something that's happening in the news right now that is relevant to both them and your area of expertise. Or it could just simply be entertaining. You know, there's a company we have in the UK here called Innocent Drinks. Now, when you sign up to their newsletter, you get very little about their drinks. In fact, their email newsletter is far more similar to something that you might receive from a friend who is bunking off work. They're kind of funny videos that they've seen, even poems. There's a whole load of things in there. Very little of it is actually related to what they do. And that's a risky strategy, of course. But what they do is really clever because it fits in with their brand. And the way it fits in with their brand is by being almost like a friend. We're different from all the other drinks companies. We're a little bit different from them. So you want to read and take in the emails that they're sending. So that's how they get the first pillar of building a list right, is because they're serving their list in the right way. They understand their audience and they're giving them the content that they want to receive. And it's only when you've got those 2 pillars right that you can really concentrate on the third pillar, which is finding the opportunities, extracting the opportunities from your list. Because some people will go about it in the wrong way. They either don't have a list, and of course, who you're going to send to then, or they're going straight in there with a sales message without earning the right to do so first. And that's a critical flaw in itself. But I see a few people each year who go around it in a slightly weird way, which is to serve the list with valuable content, interesting, informative, educational, entertaining, but then actually never ask for the sale. And this seems strange to me. There's no point in putting the effort into providing that content if you're not going to ask for the sale afterwards. So they are the 3 principles for email marketing to be done effectively.
Wow, I've got like 17 questions based on all of that wonderfulness that you just shared. And these are in no particular order, but they're in the order I wrote them down. So let's talk about standalone email content, meaning all the content is in the email, versus, and you see this a lot, and I'd love your opinion on it, invitation emails. You know, come to this free webinar. Hey, click through and see this Facebook Live that we just did. Hey, there's something really cool on the blog, where maybe there's some content emails, but some of the emails are also of this invitation nature to consume something else outside of that email. What's your take on that as far as effectiveness or even end user preference or any of the research from all of the clients that you work with?
There has to be a balance between the educational content and the sales content. And I put that typically at 80-20. Where I don't really have a personal preference is on where that balance sits in either frequency or the proportion of each email. So for many of my clients that I work with, we will have a newsletter format where 80% of that content is valuable to the reader and 20% of the content is suggesting products or services. The great thing about doing it in that way is the products and services you suggest can fit in with the theme of what you've been talking about with the newsletter as a whole. I think where you run the risk with one-off invitation style emails is that lends itself then to emailing far too frequently. And when you're appearing too frequently in someone's inbox, that's where people get turned off by what you're saying.
Well, this is a fantastic topic because people, you know, this is like the, I think it's a Woody Allen movie where Woody Allen and Diane Keaton go into the sex therapist and they say, So the sex therapist asks the two of them, how often are you having sex? And Diane Keaton says, oh, constantly, 2 to 3 times a week. And Woody Allen's answer is hardly ever. I mean, 2, 3 times a week. So it's the same data point. One says, oh my God, it's too much. One says, oh, I hardly ever get it. What is too frequent, and how do we know for our audience, for our topic, for our tribe, when we're burning out the list versus when we're getting real good value and regular cadence in front of that list that they will respond to?
Well, that's a great analogy, and I've not heard that one before.
Feel free to use it, my friend. It's my gift to you.
Thank you. It does depend entirely on your audience, and I'll give you an example of that. So a number of my clients are speakers and coaches where they're emailing either weekly, fortnightly, or monthly, and the regularity of it becomes a way of being able to break into your audience's routine. If you want to become part of their routine, you have to break it because they already have things that they're doing. But to give you an example of where the audience has to play a part is, so if my speakers and coaches are emailing weekly, fortnightly, or monthly, it depends on where it fits with their schedule. But I have 3 or 4 dentists that I work with. And as much as I'd love them to be sending weekly because, hey, I'd get paid more if they were sending weekly, I just can't, with all honesty, recommend to them that they email any more than monthly. Because, may I ask you now, David, would you want to hear from your dentist more than once a month?
I really don't.
Yeah, exactly. So I'd say the sweet spot has to come with understanding your audience, maybe survey them, ask them. This doesn't have to be just a one-way conversation. You can ask them whether the content you're sending is useful and whether the regularity is hitting the spot.
Hey, this interview is a real moneymaker. If you're serious about ramping up your reach and revenue as a speaker, trainer, or expert, book a confidential speaker strategy call with our team. The link is doitmarketing.com/call. It will be the most valuable 45 minutes you invest in your speaking-driven business. Speaking of value, let's get back to the show. Now, let's talk about this also, because I think the key thing is to communicate with your folks the way they want to be communicated. Some email platforms have a frequency setting where you can click, like Infusionsoft and some of these more advanced email marketing platforms, send me less frequent emails is an option. Some of the simpler platforms, MailChimp, Constant Contact, you're either on the list or you're not on the list. And every blast goes to everyone. So I guess there's 2 questions wrapped up in there, Nathan. One is around segmentation, and then the other is around preference of frequency. Are there email platforms that you recommend to your clients if they come to you and say, hey, Nathan, I'm using MailChimp, I'm using Constant Contact, I'm not sure if that's the best tool. I want to have this kind of control over my email, but I'm not getting it. Might you recommend a platform change? And then let's also spend a little bit of time talking about smart segmentation.
So segmentation is really important, but it has to be a balance between how finely you're segmenting it and how much fresh and new content you're creating as to whether it can fit with your schedule. Speakers in particular suffer in a lot of cases from the marketing seesaw, is that they're needing some business, so they try and drum up some business, but then they're busy delivering keynotes and workshops, and then all of a sudden the marketing stops. So there has to be a balance there to make sure that if you're segmenting and needing to create more content that fits each of those segments, that you have the time to be able to do that, not just on your quiet days or weeks or months, but also on your busiest. And that sometimes means having the infrastructure of either internal team or outsourced team to be able to create that. Or it's about taking a broader view of the content that I'm sending out is relevant to both my bookers, to my audiences, and to individuals that don't necessarily fit one of those categories. If you want to take a broad point, your area of expertise is your area of expertise. So there's only any reason to segment if you feel it's going to be worthwhile and the content that you're sending is going to be relevant to that specific segment. To give you an example, if you speak to both corporate businesses and also to schools, the area of expertise might be the same, but the action points that you're going to give them would be completely different. So where you might segment there is to say to my corporate clients, we have this content and we have this call to action at the bottom. For my school clients, we have this piece of content that's the same as the other, but we just change the call to action at the bottom. You can segment smart without needing to spend too much time on that. And to answer the question about preferred platforms, I have 2 that I recommend to most new clients and people who I talk to on a day-to-day basis. And it depends where you sit in terms of experience with email marketing and how much you want to get out of it. The first one I recommend is Campaign Monitor because it's just damn easy to use. It's really straightforward to use. And for most people, it's just so easy to understand. The second that I recommend is Active Campaign. Active Campaign, I think, does have a slightly higher investment than Campaign Monitor, and it all depends on the size of the list you have as to how much you'll need to spend on those. But in both of those cases, every marketing dollar that we spend, we're looking to reclaim tens or hundreds of times on top of that.
You know, it's funny that you mentioned that people make two mistakes. One is not selling to the list at all in any way, shape, or form. And then they go, yeah, I've been sending my email newsletter for 15 years and it hasn't brought me a single piece of business. So when you look at those newsletters, like, well, there's no opportunity for it to bring you a piece of business. And then there's people like me. And I market the living daylights out of my list. I'm constantly inviting and pitching and offering and webinar and book a call and come on in and give me a hug and all that kind of stuff. When you're balancing, and I love your 80-20 ratio, are we talking about a PS in the email? Are we talking about a little graphical sidebar? You know, hire Phil Jones for your next event. And Phil was a buddy and also a previous guest on the show. Is it that kind of thing? Or how do we make that 80-20 in a given newsletter a reality?
The content that sits within your newsletter, if you're recommending products and services, that's a service in itself to your prospects. This isn't about saying, here's some content, now buy something. This is about saying, here's something that you can do if you want to invest in your own professional development. Hey, here's a shortcut. If you want to spend a bit of money, there's a way that you can do that a little bit quicker, a little bit easier. It's going to be something that's recommending based on the content that you're sending.
I got it. I mean, that's really the key, is the congruence between the content and the offer.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the crux of it. And you'll know based on the responses that you're getting and your unsubscribe rates or spam report rates as to whether the content that you're sending is hitting the spot. And as I said earlier, if you're unsure about whether the content that you're sending, whether it's working or not, it can be a two-way conversation. Ask your audience, see what is working. The only way you can do that, though, is to be sending out regularly. The biggest mistake is that people aren't sending out content on a regular and consistent basis. And the reason that's such a big issue, I think, especially with speakers, is that we have lots of conversations where we're trying to find speaking opportunities, and not all of them are going to be right. There could be budget constraints. There could be the fact that the speaker agenda is already set for that year. It could be that they love you, but hey, they've already got the budget tied up for that year. That person or that organization doesn't necessarily have to be a no. They can be someone who can say yes later, but the only way they can do that is if you communicate with them on an ongoing basis. One of the biggest questions that I get, particularly from speakers as well, is how big does your list need to be before you start emailing them? And honestly, I would say you can make a big push to be able to build a list of 20 or 30 people at the very least, if you feel you don't have a list, in a very short time. But here's the thing. If you wait until you have 50, 100, 1,000, 10,000 people, the people who you accrued at the start, they've already gone cold. Another day older, another day colder. So you've lost the effectiveness that you could have had if you'd have just emailed them in the first place.
Yes, very, very important. I know that a lot of our folks listening, the consultants, speakers, coaches, trainers, they have a wealth of content. Content is not their problem. Using email marketing effectively might certainly be their problem. If they have blogs, if they have a robust YouTube channel, if they have posts on Facebook and LinkedIn, talk about repurposing, recycling, and reframing some of that content so that they're not saying, oh my gosh, I have to write another email newsletter, and this just gets to be another thing. They're already writing Facebook posts. They're already writing articles either on their blog or in the industry trade publications where they're contributing. How much can we and should we be repurposing and cross-pollinating our platforms to feed the email beast?
I think it is a really critical part, not least because the content that you're already putting out there, it already exists. So it's just another way of being able to feed those platforms. So you get the benefit of increasing your YouTube views and your YouTube subscribers, boosting your Twitter followers. But hey, a newsletter shouldn't be a difficult chore. It shouldn't be something where you think, oh, I know I need to write a newsletter this week, and you've got a blank cursor staring back at you. Where I work with clients is on creating a structure. The structure stays the same each week or fortnight or month whenever it goes out, and then they just have to fill in the gaps. So I can talk you through what that structure is, but a big part of that is syndicating content that's already out there. It's pointing people in the direction of content that's already created. Because as good as newsletters are, and as much as I love them, they're not the best format for every piece of content you're going to create. Videos don't work too well, so you have to create clickable thumbnails to YouTube, because YouTube's always going to be a better platform for delivering that video. The structure that I talk through with my clients is to have a personal introduction at the top, because that should be the bit that is exclusive to the newsletter. That should be something that's written from you to them as a conversation, signed off even with a signature if you need. You have a link through to an existing piece of content, blog post, maybe something that was written in a magazine. You have a video, and it could be framed as being your TV show. It's a link through to your YouTube channel essentially, but it's a clickable thumbnail. It has a play button on there, and it's a link through to a piece of video content that is already syndicated. It exists elsewhere. I've also started recently putting in a quick tip, and it's designed to be a tip that if someone were to only read that, they would recognize your name, they'd take value from the email, and it might take them 5 seconds. I've even started recently adding in a tweet this link that can then include your Twitter handle. It can include the hashtags that you want to, but at the very least, they get to read a quick tip. And then you have a promotional section. It's the product or service that you want to recommend based on what it is you've been talking about within that newsletter. If it's speaking one day, if it's a book the next day, if it's an online course the next day, that's okay. It's whatever's relevant to that content and what you want to promote at that time.
Super quick commercial break. Isn't this interview amazing? If you'd like to get more ideas on how to start or grow your speaking business fast, pop over to our free training at doitmarketing.com/webinar. Let's also talk about, because I think a lot of speakers get this wrong too, but you're the guru in this, not me. They look at it as a series of emails. They do not look at it as an email series. So there's no campaign mindset. There's no this month, next month, this quarter, next quarter, almost like you'd have a, God forbid, a marketing calendar or a publicity calendar. We should have an email calendar. So people say, oh, I've got this big conference coming up in June. Let's blast a couple emails out. It's like, well, you should have thought of that back in February. So talk about the campaign mindset that you help your speakers and consultants and small business owners think about, so that it's not always a last minute scramble to fill in that structure.
Well, the newsletter is one medium. So to give the marketing calendar idea, it would be one column within the marketing calendar where you would say, here's another way of us being able to promote it. So you make a great point there. If you were to start with the content of a newsletter, it makes sense to look at the existing marketing that you're doing to see what's going to take precedence in terms of what you want to promote. So that has to be a good starting point. But it does have to fit in with your existing marketing as well. It's not the one answer to everything. I mean, in all honesty, although email marketing is very, very good for making sales, particularly for high ticket value items, I always recommend it not being used to make sales. It's being used to get engagement, but also to start conversations. There are very few opportunities where someone is going to exist on your list for however many years, read your newsletters, and then say, we've got the booking. You have to have the conversation to be able to work out what those needs are and work out whether you're going to be a fit for it. So that has to be the case.
Well, let's do a little inside baseball, as we say here in the US, and kind of go behind the speaking and agency business that you have, Nathan. When did you go from solo guy, solo speaker, I'm going to run your email marketing campaigns for you? What was your first hire? How did you look at that from a business evolution standpoint?
My business has taken many forms over the years, and obviously it's changed with the services that I offer. No longer doing websites since started 9 or so years ago with speaking and managing email marketing for clients. So it has taken lots of forms, both in the size of the business and what I've been doing. So my first hire was actually an operations coordinator who was an employed person who, unfortunately, almost did himself out of a job. He was so good at creating the processes for the business that he was no longer required. But he then went on to start his own business and was doing things like that for others as well. So, I mean, he was great for where the business was at the time. Where I feel the business is at in terms of the product now, I love the structure of it for a couple of reasons. And kind of letting you behind the curtain here, I've never wanted a business where I'd just be selling keynote speeches. Do you know why? Because I just don't want to work that hard. I really don't. I hate the idea of waking up on the first of the month and needing to make the sales for the month or needing to make the sales for the next quarter.
Yeah.
I love the idea of having a business where the income is either truly leveraged through book sales and through online courses, or at least it's recurring. So as long as I keep the clients happy and continue to give them value, I know I always have a starting point at the beginning of each month for where my revenue sits. Then it frees me up with the time to be able to lead generate and do everything that I need to on the speaking side of the business. My business exists with both of those structures.
So the monthly recurring revenue, that's magic. And I think a lot of speakers and experts are trying to figure that out. You went from teaching it to kind of coaching it, done with you to actually done for you. And you still have all three levels of that going? Or is it pretty much just, I'll talk to your group and then the folks come to me for the done for you?
You're right. It still exists in all three of those ways. So I still speak and write on email marketing and email newsletters. I can do it for you, or I can coach you through it for you to do it yourselves. Because especially for bigger businesses where they have a marketing team within their infrastructure, they've got the capability to be able to do it. They just need the correct guidance on how to do it effectively.
Right. I know you've got your two books. You've got the Delivered book, The No Nonsense Guide to Successful Email Marketing. And then the other book is Opened, Great Subject Lines for Higher Email Open Rates. And we'll talk about those and we'll link those up in the show notes when people go to thespeakingshow.com. I know you have all kinds of other cool resources and things to share as well. How did the books play a part in elevating and escalating your thought leadership platform? And how are you leveraging those books as a business tool?
So Delivered is the bigger of those books in that it is a full guide on email marketing. So when I wrote that, it took me a while to write because it was almost pooling all of my knowledge. There was a little bit of a mindset shift there as to, well, how much do I put in the book? Do I put everything I know, or do I keep the good stuff for the really high paying clients? In fact, most of what I know about email marketing, or at least what I knew when the book was written, is in that book. And in terms of how it's developed my speaking business, it's been particularly good. The second book, Opened, is designed really to be a smaller book. I'd never really expect anyone to read it cover to cover, although many people do. It's designed to be a reference. I'd love for that book to be when anyone decides they're going to create an email campaign, they pick that book off the shelf to choose a subject line or create their own. There's 171 in there. And that book came about based on a funny story from a few years ago. I have an ebook called 20 Best Subject Lines. And the way that book came about, it's a smaller version of Opened. And the way that book came about was I was at a seminar back in, 2013 now. So nearly, 6 years ago. And I was at a seminar where there was a marketing speaker. And this marketing speaker, he was talking through loads and loads of different marketing strategies. I mean, the thing was really, really fast paced. I was in this room with about 100 other people. And as he was talking through marketing strategies, one of the ones that he came to was email marketing. And being an expert on the topic, I thought, oh, well, I'd love to know what he has to say about that. And he was good. He talked about email marketing in a similar way to how I would. And I was surprised that someone at the back of the room, a lady, put her hand up and he asked if she had a question. And she said, no, actually, she'd like to volunteer something that had worked particularly well for her around email marketing. And she said, I made a little change to my subject line on my email newsletter that I send each week. And I've got a really big jump in my open rate. And I looked around the room and there were loads of people kind of nodding their heads, either because they'd tried a similar thing and got a similar result, or they were thinking, oh, we should go back and try that. And I saw an opportunity there, not necessarily to win business, but I thought, hey, it's got to be worth a punt. I put my hand up as well. And I said, well, it's funny you should say that. I have an ebook that has the 20 best subject lines that you can use if you want to get higher open rates from your email campaigns. I said, if anyone wants a copy, I've got an exhibition table at the back. Just drop a business card on there and I'd be more than happy to send it to you. There were about 100 people in the room there, and I got 47 business cards from people who wanted a copy of the 20 Best Subject Lines ebook. Funny thing is, that ebook didn't exist until I wrote it the next day.
Very nice. I love it. Whatever happened to that woman that had the brilliant email tweak? Did her idea make it in the book, or did you talk to her?
Do you know, I didn't. I don't know what her subject lines were that she'd used that got the higher open rates.
But 21. Nathan,
there could be
21. You missed one because we didn't talk to the woman.
Very true. Very true. It took me a little while to get the book together, but I knew I had the stats.
No, that was brilliant. I mean, talk about creating, don't worry about opportunity knocks. If opportunity doesn't knock, build a door. And you built a door, my friend. That was totally fantastic. As we're wrapping up here, if people were to take one central idea about email marketing, what would you hope it would be?
Well, if you think about however long you've been in business, and I know that people listening to this show will have been in business for varying lengths of time, really I think about, not to be too negative about this, but how much money and potentially how many opportunities might have been lost by not staying in touch with the people that you've met on a consistent basis. If you just start doing it now, if you find where your list could exist right now and use it, send valuable content on an ongoing basis, consistently, highly valuable, and see what opportunities you can find from there.
Fantastic. All right, my friend. Last question. How do people get in touch and stay in touch with the amazing Nathan Littleton empire?
Well, you can find me on Twitter. I am Nath Speaks, but the best way to find out information about what I do is at nathanlittleton.com.
And that's where the books and the blogs and the resources and all the good stuff is up there.
Absolutely, yeah.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you. This was so tremendously valuable. I know that folks listening, and again, I'm going to encourage you, go to thespeakingshow.com right under this episode. All of Nathan's resources, all the links, both books, the website, the blog, all that great stuff is waiting for you. And we have to have you back. This was just the beginning of our conversation. And we'd love to have you back and talk even more about this, because I think this is, in my world anyway, email marketing is the pipeline to cash.
Absolutely. And thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
Well, that wraps up another episode of The Speaking Show. Hey, tell you what, if you like us, rate us and review us on iTunes. Subscribe. Tell a friend. Go grab the notes and downloads and extras at thespeakingshow.com. See you next time.